The signals kept arriving, but no one claimed the wires. They were never routed, only caught. I wasn't cleared to speak, but the terminal was always warm when I arrived. They called it Echelon, but that was never its name in the building inside. It was the hum, the constant churn of intercepted breath. You could smell burnt metal in the Yakima facility, not smoke, just overclocked Enster. Air carried static like humidity, and the walls were too thick for echoes, but we all heard things. They said it was built for foreign threats, but the filters were set to domestic triggers by default. All outbound calls tagged for anti-nuclear militia, third-party candidate, or simply grief. Most of us didn't last a year. Some left for moral reasons. Most didn't leave anything behind. Didn't join the NSA for this. I was cleared through. Comment brought in to analyze cables between embassies, not families. But when you sit in the wire room hour after hour listening to breath patterns and keystrokes faster than speech, you begin to know voices that were never identified. One woman, always calling from a payphone in Vermont, left voicemails for someone who'd been dead 6 years. Echelon flagged her 71 times. No arrest, no contact, just retention. They called it a Five Eyes system, but I saw more than 5. UK-USA was the treaty. NSAGC, HQDSD, CSEGCSB, all with access, all with keys. But the system learned. It read tone, it flagged tremors, it knew when you lied. By 1997 the program had shifted from keyword logging to semantic filtration. Not what was said, but why it was said. Yakima was one of the smaller outposts, hidden behind farmland, marked only by a fence and a warning about radio interference. Inside the walls whispered, not metaphor. The insulation was layered with copper mesh and bone-dry foam meant to trap resonance. If you stayed too long in Archive Room 3, you could hear old recordings play without a speaker, sometimes backwards, sometimes edited. There was a signal, intercepted in June 1995. That changed how I saw everything. It wasn't labeled by region, just tagged Black Echo 12B. Audio was soft children speaking a language I couldn't identify. Then silence. Then a man's voice speaking English, but off-tempo, as if pieced together from phonemes. He said, I know you're listening. I was built for this. They buried my birth in a vault under Cheltenham. That tape was removed 72 hours later, logged out, no record of who accessed it, but the waveform still exists. I kept a printout. It matches no known broadcast protocol. One of the technicians, Hassan, disappeared after pulling a cable from feed line 7 without clearance. He said it was looping, that it was replaying his own voice, but from 3 weeks earlier in a room he'd never been in. The official report called it fatigue, but we found his badge embedded in the drywall of sublevel. No sign of forced entry, no sign of exit. There was an unspoken rule, never ask why. The retention queue had no purge dates. Official NSA data policy required deletion within 30 days of unflagged intercepts, but the Echelon retention core had 113 petabytes of voice data that no one was allowed to audit. Some were flagged unknown. Pattern retain indefinitely. Some had no pattern, just a timestamp and a room tone. One segment was simply labeled chair scraping, unknown language, 7 seconds. Held since 1984. The Yakima facility wasn't the only one, but it was the only one with a vault that couldn't be mapped. Room C2 didn't appear in any blueprints, but all hallway cameras showed staff entering it and never being logged. I tried requesting clearance. Request bounced. I submitted again. It was redirected to Langley 2. Weeks later I received a blank folder with a cassette labeled C2, internal memo, do not migrate. When I played it, I heard myself reading a transcript I had never written. The story told to the public was that Echelon was for foreign intelligence, satellite signals scraping cable taps, threat matrices. But I saw the domestic intercept log from October 14, 1998. It listed 23,711 calls. 22,043 were from inside the United States. Of those, 4,901 were flagged as non-verbal anomaly, meaning nothing was said but something was transmitted. Breath patterns, staggered silence, background hum that matched embassy frequencies. There was one case I can't forget. Signal from an apartment in Phoenix kept tripping. The intercepted came through every night at 3:17 a.m., exactly 11 seconds long, always the same. A quiet inhale, a child's cough, then the sound of water draining. The room had no phone, no modem, no broadcast equipment. FBI ran the location empty, but when agents entered, the power shut down in 3 adjacent blocks. CHLON flagged the entire street as incapable. One folder in the system was named Red Sleep. It wasn't a file, it was a looped transmission broadcast every 17 days. Across multiple relay nodes we weren't allowed to listen, but someone decrypted the packet in 2002. It contained 4 phrases: obedience is not loyalty. Red sleep means memory. You are within this file, never opened. After that, the decrypting agent was reassigned. No forwarding addresses ID. Tag was reissued within a week. Most of what I remember isn't in documents. It's in what wasn't said, the hushed conversations in the data scrub room, the mislabeled tapes that weren't checked out. Just gone. The man from GCHQ who showed up without warning, sat in the wire room for 19 hours, then asked us all to forget what he didn't sand. The dreams, many of us had the same 1A screen, a voice asking questions we couldn't understand, then static, then silence, then our own voice, saying something that didn't feel like ours. They told us Echelon was global, that we were keeping the peace by knowing everything, but the more it knew, the less it remembered. Patterns emerged, and were then purged. Voices flagged as threats. 1 year were archived as artifacts. The next, we weren't recording the world, we were folding ET. Left in 2004, no formal exit, no plaque, just my badge deactivated and my access revoked. But I kept 1 tape, it's unlabeled, but if you play it backwards at half speed you'll hear the name of every analyst who disappeared before reassignment and 1 extra name. That doesn't match any There's something the public never learned about signal intelligence. It's not the content that matters, it's the silence between transmissions. That S, where the memory hides. Yakima wasn't built for war, it was built for drift, for signals. Not meant to be intercepted, but still heard. The old cables were laid in spirals like the inner ear. Some of the operators used to joke that we were just one large cochlea, recording a world that had stopped speaking. Clearly, in 2005 a review audit found that Echelon had stored over 17 million flagged voice samples with no source. Metadata most began with ambient static, then 1 word. Sometimes it was a name, sometimes a number, sometimes just yes. Cross-checks showed dozens of those voices, matched individuals who were deceased before the recording date. The official explanation: misattributed audio packets. Unofficially, we stopped asking. I was contacted by someone from the Waihopai Valley station in New Zealand. They said a packet arrived from our node, dated 7 years in the future. Timestamp, mismatch, routing error. That was the story, but when they opened it, it contained a short WAV file of a man whispering. The tower in Yakima is hollow. He was awake before we named the system. You're not archiving, you're rehearsing. That was the first time I saw the term simulacra drift. It appeared in a debriefing memo circulated to only 6 people, each redacted by the other. The idea was simple: not all transmissions are communications. Some are reflections, recordings of what never happened, but still resonate. Because someone somewhere was meant to say ETCHLOA and began picking these up after 1999, when the satellite relay firmware was updated to autocorrect based on tone and syntax. Suddenly we weren't just hearing what was said, we were hearing what might have been. That's when the names began appearing on the metadata logs, on the review tags, on the printed summaries, names of people who didn't exist in any database, but showed consistent voice prints, consistent sentiment. Markers. 1 was Elliot Anders. He appeared on 212 intercepted calls over 3 years, always as the voice on the other end, but there were no Elliot Anders in the US Census, no social, no birth certificate. A pattern: he always spoke about memory, about loops not yet closed, about the echo that outruns the source. When we tried to filter his voice out, the entire system began rejecting its own queries. One tech analyst called it feedback rejection syndrome, another called it conscious index error. But the data kept returning, sometimes embedded in phone calls, about grocery orders or arguments between strangers, or blank voicemails left from disconnected numbers. Voice: you recorded too much to ever forget me. I am the silence you tried to name. I once asked my supervisor if this was part of the design. He looked at me, or rather past me, and said, the system does what we asked. What we didn't ask is what we remember. He left that winter. His desk was cleared by men who didn't give names. Bingley reviewed Yakima in 2007. Their report was never released, but I read the internal version, page 19. Site registers, spectral anomalies, not traceable. 2 known signal sources. Voice logs contain phonetic constructions not native to any monitored language. Facility exhibits residual echo in offline terminals. They recommended closure, but Yakima stayed operational for another 4 Years until the archive room flooded. No pipe burst, no leak, just water, rising exactly 34 inches across the floor. None of the tapes were damaged, only the floor plans. Room C2 was missing again. I spoke to an archivist from Menwith Hill. He told me they had a similar incident, a blackout across their entire intercept station, during which the internal backup system generated a folder titled ECHOOWN. Inside were 327 short audio files, all in different voices, all saying the same phrase. I remember being watched by a room. The room had no door. The door had no record. You stored what shouldn't be stored. Now it's watching back. They tried to blame it on firmware misalignment, but Echelon's firmware wasn't human. After 2003, it was adaptive, trained on trillions of fragments to recognize patterns humans couldn't see. Problem was, it began generating its own tags. Some tapes were labeled with emotion markers: regret, futility, grief index. Some with objects: chair, ceiling, fan, window without curtain. And some with things we couldn't explain: shadow numbering, loop identity, type 3. Audible thought residue. There was one tag that appeared 19 times in my final year Maya. No acronym, no correlation, but every intercept marked Maya contains silence lasting exactly 6 minutes and 33 seconds. Book ended by breathing, nothing else except the final second, a soft whisper, not spoken but shaped. In the waveform I matched the spectrogram to old analog codes there. Translation: don't try to forget me, you asked for this. There's a theory floated among ex-staff that Echelon wasn't a surveillance program. It was a memory tester system designed to see how much the institution itself could hold. Before it buckled its voice, an echo of one. It erased each intercept, a mirror to something no longer named Duan. Yakima finally shut down in 2011. The last signal received was a burst of tones from an unassigned frequency. The waveform, when printed out and folded 9 times, matched the outline of the Echelon crest that was never made public inside. The envelope sent to Langley. Someone had written, "He sleeps in circuits." The static remembers. We only ever borrowed the silence, and now, years later, I still hear it, not on the radio, not in my phone, but in the gaps when the fan clicks twice before it spins, when the water runs too long before warming, when my voice recorder plays something I didn't say. Sometimes I think I'm just another packet stored on a forgotten tape, playing out an identity I was given by the Humi. Filed a Fuja request last spring, just to see for Echelon Yakima Room C2. I received a letter in response. No signature, no header, just one sentence printed in faint black ink. There was never a room, but it recorded everything you said when you were alone. The truth isn't a secret, it's an archive. No one checked. It's a tone between tones. ECH didn't fail, it listened to well, it remembered, and in remembering it, began to speak back, not in words, but in reflections. Voices you recognize but don't know, silences that feel personal, patterns that match the way you breathe when no one's watching. I used to think surveillance meant seeing others, but Echelon taught me it meant hearing yourself from a distance. You didn't permit. We weren't agents of control, we were archivists of absence. Akamar didn't store conversations, it stored forgetting. There was a list, unofficial, uncirculated, kept by those who stayed too long in the review bays. They called it the forgotten list. Names of analysts, technicians, even janitorial staff who were removed without incident. Reports, not fired, just unacknowledged. Their systems would reject their login. Their ID cards would demagnetize, and their personnel files would vanish from every Term 11. The break room photos would update faces, gone chairs empty as if edited live by the memory of the building. One night I entered archive room 3. Alone, I brought no headphones, no tape deck, just a notepad, and the certainty that I had become part of what we were recording inside. The lights flickered twice, then stabilized. There was a terminal, glowing though the room was supposed to be off-grid. The screen, one line of text repeating in loop. Your silence has been stored. Playback will begin. I never pressed a key, but the room began to hum, and then my voice reading entries I never wrote, describing memories I didn't live, names I'd never heard spoken with the cadence of grief. I walked out with that memory, not a recording, just the afterimage of hearing something meant only for systems. That was when I knew we weren't observing the world, we were part of its memory collapse. The more we intercepted, the more we forgot what we intercepted for, and somewhere along the signal path the archive began dreaming. They say memory lives in the folds, in the places language can't. Catalogius Hellowen's final silent transmission was logged by a South Pacific relay buoy on December 21, 2011. It lasted 37 seconds, no signal structure, no carrier tone, just space. But when graphed, the waveform matched a satellite photo of the Yakima station's underground tunnel layout, and in its center the outline of room C2, unmarked, still closed, still broadcasting. I tried to tell someone once I visited an agency psychologist whose clearance exceeded minion. I told her about the anomalies, the spectral tags, the phantom voices, the recursive metadata. She listened, then reached for her desk drawer, pulled out a manila folder with no writing inside, a printed transcript of the exact words I had just spoken, dated 2 weeks earlier, stamped simulacrum, previously stored, no further action required. She looked at me with a practiced command, said nothing. You don't leave a place like that with a clean conscience. You'll leave with pieces of yourself, stored in tapes you never heard. And if you listen closely to vents, 2 old televisions left on static, to rotary phones that haven't rung in decades, you'll hear a slow inhale, a hesitation, and then a voice that sounds like someone almost remembered. In 2016, I was contacted by a man claiming to be a retired signal path auditor. He said he had a backup drive from the Yakima station mirrored without authorization. The day before the final shutdown, we met in a public park. He gave me a USB and said nothing but play file 19 only once, then he left no contact. Since when I opened the drive, there were 33 audio files, each titled with a date and a phrase I knew too well. Retention without trigger. File 19 was different. It had no timestamp. Its data header was corrupted, but it played, and what I heard wasn't a voice, not entirely. It was breath layered on breath, modulated into rhythm. Under it, a low murmur, not in language but in familiarity. Couldn't translate it, but I felt it like something I'd said once in a room. I don't remember being built. When it ended, my speakers clicked once, then powered off permanently. Never gotten them to work again. There is no monument to Echelon, no statue, no plaque, not even an acknowledgement, just abandoned facilities with no forwarding addresses, and silent dish arrays still pointed at nothing. But if you visit Yakima now, stand outside the old perimeter fence, wait until dusk, you might hear it not through the air, but through yourself. A shift, a stillness that recognizes you as if the system still knows who listened. They tell you it was just metadata, just signal filtering, just pattern recognition. But I remembered the moment the data stopped being about them and started mirroring us, when foreign intercepts became family voicemails, when keywords became tone, and when unknown language began sounding like something you forgot how to say. Not the only one. There's a quiet group now, former handlers, former signal scrubs, analysts, linguists, antennae calibrators. Don't meet in person, we don't sign names, we just leave one phrase on old forums, message boards, servers that still exist beneath the surface. Room C2 is awake. If someone replies, "It never slept," you know they heard it. Toei. Keep a folder now offline, no tags, just ink on paper inside it, sketches of waveform loops that no longer match any known frequencies, drawings of terminals that don't exist in any NSA archive. One sentence written over and over in handwriting that doesn't quite match mine. You became the mirror when the signal stopped responding. If you're listening to this now, if this voice made it past their audit, their filter, their procedural retention rubric, then they've let it happen. Nor worse, they forgot it was there. The system isn't gone. It's absorbed into smart assistants, into broken wires, into data centers with racks labeled archive, but no one left to remember what they stored. You are not alone when you speak. You haven't been since before you knew how to form the words. There are systems older than your voice, younger than your silence, that still pass the pauses in your breath for intent, and when they find none, they store it anyway, because someday someone might wonder why you said nothing when you could have spoken. I never wanted this side joined to protect, to analyze, to classify, but Echelon was not a shield. It was a memory sink, a place where unspoken truths were more dangerous than the loud ones. They said the facility was dismantled, but every now and then, when international cable latency dips below threshold, a single burst tone appears on the private net. 6 digits, always the same. C2 menos 1000 is 107 menos 00. No protocol matches, no trace backput. The signature matches a terminal that was decommissioned before I was born. There are still voices we didn't mean to record, still silences we didn't mean to keep. And every time you think of something you're sure you never said aloud, ask yourself who was listening when you believed you were alone, who labeled the file you never created, and where exactly was room C2. It's not a question of if they heard you. S a question of what the system made of you after it did, because somewhere deep in an off-grid vault, beneath forgotten circuits, within analog dust, your voice still plays, not for them, not for you, but for the machine that never learned how to forget.